Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is SamuelLit64, and welcome to the RoboCast, the 14th episode of BattleBots for the 2018 season. I'm joined alongside, as ever,
Steve the American Killjoy.
and we have two guests this week from the actual episode itself. Guest number one, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mischa and Graaf, team captain of Team Petunia.
And guest number two.
This is Hal Rucker from Team Black and Blue, and our robot's name is Duck.
Yeah, first time on for you, Hal. Obviously, you've had quite the season so far. You've been up and down a couple of times. How would you rate your season so far?
Well, been pretty happy with how we've been doing. Our first two matches were successful victories, and then unfortunately we went up against the number 2 and the number 1 seeds right in a row, which was a challenge.
I mean, there's not much more difficult opponents than Bronco and Tombstone back to back, really, is there?
No, they're both veterans that have been around a long time. They're great machines, and they're both very different types of opponents. So it was a real challenge for us.
Yeah, of course. And obviously, you were here last season as well with a radically different machine, Ringmaster. Why the big change for Duck?
The change was due to practical reasons. We were really looking forward to doing a new version of the Ringmaster. In season 2, the version of the Ringmaster that we brought, we kind of thought of as a prototype because it was such a complicated machine. And the first match we had was the first time we ever turned it on and drove it. So we actually have Ringmaster 2.0 redesigned and in CAD and ready to be built. But because of logistical reasons, we only had about 3 weeks to get a robot ready for season 3. And we didn't want to do a bad job of the new Ringmaster. We just didn't have time to do it right. So we pivoted and did the simplest robot I could think of that we knew we could get done in time. So that's how
it makes sense, really. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, Ringmaster, as you said, it was very complex, and Duck, by comparison, is much, much more simple.
Yeah, and Duck uses a lot of parts that were in one of our other robots called Whoops that we used at RoboGames. So we stole parts from Whoops, put it in as a way to make our deadline.
Permanently borrowed is probably a nicer term.
Yeah, and a lot of them we can't use again because people like Tombstone just broke them in half.
Oh gosh.
We'll get to that fight in a little bit. Obviously, we'll get on to the first fight of the night, which is technically from last week, which was Reality and Lucky. An excellent fight. I'm sure, Mischa, you can probably talk to us a little bit about the Dutch guy's plan going into this. Maybe?
No, not really, because I've been busy all my spare time repairing Petunia. We had a lot of work to do after the fight against Monsoon, and I think they went up against Lucky in that same time. So I have seen the fight, but I don't know much else about it.
It was a good fight. I mean,
Yeah. It was the first win they got.
Yeah, which is it's nice to see, considering their robot's been fairly unlucky up to this point.
Yeah, what I do know is their speed controller failed against Duck. That's why it fell still, and they borrowed mine. So only my speed controllers are a lot bigger than the ones they use. So they had to take out 2 batteries, I guess. So they had less power, but it was more reliable then.
I mean, reliability can sometimes help. I actually completely forgot that Duck fought Reality at some point this season. It's been a long season. It's a long time ago. Got a bit of fatigue. It was. I say, as science channel fights go, generally they tend to be slightly poorer, but it was a really good fight. I really enjoyed it. For my 2 cents at least, I rather enjoyed it. But with that said, we'll crack on with the episode. We're actually reviewing episode 14, and we start with Hal. And I know, I can't remember which year it was, but I know you fought Tombstone, not Tombstone, no, Last Right, sorry, a couple of years ago. I think it was 2017, was it? Were you fought with Whoops?
Yeah, that was 2017 at Robo Games.
Did you, fancy your chances going up against Tombstone? Obviously, having won before.
Definitely. I was actually really looking forward to the match. I don't know if they talked about it at all, or maybe someone else talked about it in a previous podcast, but they had done this thing where it's called the bounty hunter matches.
Right.
And you're allowed to volunteer to fight either Tombstone or Minotaur under different conditions. So we volunteered to take on Tombstone as a bounty hunter match.
Interesting. I don't think they mentioned it on the show or anything, but that's a pretty awesome concept considering if you want to prove yourself, you got to take out a big dog.
Yeah, and there are some special prizes or something if you actually beat them. I forget the details. But the match didn't happen. They decided not to move forward with it for some logistical reasons.
Right. And obviously,
the reasons were, I think I can tell you that. They said you can fight Tombstone or a Minotaur and get $1,000. And my immediate question would be, what if you win? But it was only if you won, you would get that money. But both Tombstone and Minotaur said, we won't take the risk getting our robots damaged for just $1,000. And I've been thinking I can build half a robot with $1,000. So
it kind of gives you perspective,
I have the cheaper robot. So I guess that's a legitimate reason for them to say we won't. And they were both in competition, so it's a risk doing other fights in between.
I mean, it makes sense,
But that was the challenge.
Yeah, it's a lot of money to build obviously a very competitive machine, and obviously $1,000 contributes, but it doesn't really cover necessarily a machine at the level of say Tombstone or Minotaur. But that's by the by. Coming to the fight itself, Hal, obviously, you, as you say, you've fought Last Rites before, obviously Tombstone is a very different machine in a sense that it's been a lot more reliable in BattleBots, certainly. Was that a kind of object in your mind that you kind of were, concerned about, or?
No. It was more the opposite, which was Duck has an active weapon which takes up about 80 pounds of our 250-pound robot, which meant we had to make the plow a lot smaller and lighter. So I wasn't as concerned about Tombstone being bigger and stronger as I was about Duck being smaller and weaker. And that ended up being a valid concern because you probably saw how Tombstone just snapped off the ends of our plow. Like they were potato chips.
It was certainly a snack for Tombstone.
He snapped off the ends of our front plate there. Not only did it expose our front wheels, but the angled ends of our front plate are how we get them up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
So we lost both of those features at the same time, right at the beginning of the match.
I mean, it's a daunting fight. Obviously, I think another factor that a lot of people pointed out online was a moving weapon itself is a point of weakness that Whoops doesn't have.
Exactly.
Whoops is solid, whereas this has got a small, admittedly a small weapon, but it's a weapon nonetheless. It still moves. It's still a point of weakness.
Yes, that's very true. Mm-hmm. But once he got those corners off, we were doing pretty well, and then there was kind of a glancing blow to our front right wheel, and it got jammed, which made it difficult to drive straight. And it was also acting like a brake, so we couldn't drive fast for a long time. It was actually easier to drive on one wheel than when we still had four. It wasn't this lame wheel that was holding us back.
It's one of those strange things. Obviously, you did end up down to one wheel eventually, at which point Tombstone seemingly dies and stops.
Yep.
Did you think you had it at that point, or was what did you think?
Oh, we absolutely thought we had it.
The whole world did.
Yeah.
Go on.
It's Bite Force did it this season as well, where they magically came back to life. It doesn't happen that often. Usually when a robot just dies, it's for some physical reason that doesn't just repair itself. So we were surprised when he came back to life the way he did. I know what happened to his robot and why he died. Do you want to talk about that, or have you already
sure.
talked about
it? Yeah, go for it. Go for it, yeah.
So there's a small wire that goes from the radio to the controller. It's a little RC wire that probably everyone's familiar with if they've ever flown an RC car or driven an RC car or something like that. And it developed an internal short inside the wire. So they couldn't... as the weapon was spinning and making the robot vibrate, that little contactor inside the little wire was connecting and disconnecting.
So it's sort of like an intermittent failure then, so rather than an overall one, which it appeared to at the beginning.
Exactly. So that's why kind of you could see even before he completely stopped, he was stuttering, and that's because of the same problem. That one little wire was connecting and disconnecting inside the robot, and he was losing and gaining his signal back.
Right. And then obviously, at that point, I'm sure your heart must have broken a little bit because you had Tombstone beaten, and then it comes back from the dead, and then you get beached.
Yeah, I just don't worry about the kill saws because they don't do anything to us. They don't do anything at all to most people, really, except they look scary. But in this case, it did something to us. And I don't know, and I'll never know what, because we took the robot back to the pits after the match and turned it on, and the wheel just turned fine.
Wow. Just as that one time in history, it actually did something to affect you. That was it. Job done.
Yeah, son of a bitch. It's just the worst feeling in the world because you're sitting there with a radio and you just want to go in there and fix the poor thing. But you can't. All you can do is turn your radio on and off and
that was
wait for 10 seconds to go by. It's a horrible feeling.
It was heartbreaking. You could have been, I think, the only one to ever knock out Tombstone, which would have been insane if it had happened. Obviously, it didn't on this occasion, but you got to have at least some degree of pride of how Duck held up, at least, surely.
Yeah, I thought we had a good match. The one thing that I really get mad about myself when I see the replay of the match is the moment where Tombstone is dead and I drive right into his weapon and lose some more wheels. I still have nightmares about that moment.
It could have made the difference. It could, but.
It really could have, or maybe not. We'll never know.
Hindsight is 20/20, as they say. So
it was just a really dumb move. But I had so much adrenaline at that moment, and I couldn't drive in a straight line. And you got to go straight at Tombstone to win. Brain was still going, and oh my God, he's dead. Just get away.
It was a bit too.
Brain hadn't kicked in yet. It's just a very frustrating blip of time.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure Mischa. I'm sure there was a reaction in the pits at that point when the fight was going on. I'm sure.
Yeah, I think everybody was watching that fight, and everybody was hoping Duck would win, and me also.
It was so close. It was so close.
Yeah. I have a question for Hal, if I may ask.
Yeah,
why is your scoop vertical and not angled? Why is it flat and not in an angle?
That's an excellent question. A angled wedge, which is very common, it's on most of the bots really, makes a lot of sense because it reflects your opponent's energy so that they flip up into the air and lose control. Our plate makes less sense, but it's just a different strategy in that we want to take on our opponent's energy full on and try and get them to break themselves. It's just a different way of trying to use their energy against them, and I think we do it just because it's more fun for us. It's just let's just go out there and kamikaze at them and just keep hitting them or keep having them hit us rather than fly up into the air and lose control.
I think that's one of the great things about the sport is, there's no right or wrong answer. You can go for the angled wedge, sort of like how you've got Mischa with Petunia, or you can go for the flat wedge with a duck or a whoops. There's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, I think the downside of our approach is it always looks like we're losing. We're just getting, like in the fight against reality, it looks like we're losing until we're not.
Yeah.
And then if we win, it's always, reality was winning until they had a lucky break, and they lost control. Well, we take credit for that lucky break.
You break them rather than they break themselves.
Yeah, but you never really know. It's just a bunch of violent hits and then something happens.
But in case of a judge's decision, you will always lose. And even if you break their weapon, but they're still mobile, then they still have gained points.
Yeah, you're right.
So you have to knock them out completely to win.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, 90% of the time. I mean, if we're able to, like if we had been able to push, what's a better example? Like in our very first match against Free Shipping, we got a judge's decision against them, and they weren't knocked out because we were able to lift them and tip them over and push them around a little bit.
Yeah.
It's just hard to lift Tombstone.
You're not wrong. Obviously, Hal, you moved to 2-2 for the season.
Yep.
Obviously, I know at this point you can't say, there's a 1,000,001 NDAs if you get into the, final 16 or not. We won't discuss that. But at this point, did you think you'd done enough, or was it kind of a case of you still very much unsure?
What can I tell you? Mischa, you can probably confirm this. From the first day to the last, the producers were very transparent about telling us this is television first and the competition second.
Yeah.
Right.
And they told us it's not just about your record, it's about the quality of your matches and who you went up against, the quality of your competition.
Right.
So even though we were 2-2, we were feeling optimistic that they'd consider us for this top 16. But we also knew that there were a lot of 3-1 teams ahead of us. And if I was a 3-1 team and a 2-2 team was chosen ahead of me, I'd be pretty angry.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So we just didn't know. And no one would talk to us about it because I don't think they knew either. They had to make their decisions. So we were just sitting on our hands, hoping for the best at this point.
Right. Well, obviously, we'll find out in a few weeks' time whether you do get into the top 16. But
from this point, it seems like it's from an outsider's perspective. It looks like you have a really good chance because you had 2 fights. You had a Rumble that you won, which is I know that's tougher because you got 2 bots instead of 1, and then you had those 2 fights against the top 2. Honestly, I think the top 2 bots there, and I mean even losing to both of those, I think that's still, and you still put up a good fight for both of them. So I'd say Duck's chances are pretty good, but of course we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to find out later on in the season. I think now's a good place to move on to Mischa and your time to shine against another. again, another difficult matchup. Yeti.
Yeah, the fourth spinner in a row. Wasn't really happy about that. There were teams that didn't face a spinner at all, and I had to face 4. But as Hal said, it also gains you points. Losing to a good competitor doesn't mean you're immediately out of the competition. And we knew after the Monsoon fight that if we were able to repair and get back on our feet again, it would also score points. So that was our goal to fix the robot.
Obviously, so far this season, you've been pretty pretty good in terms of the fights. Monsoon was a very, very close fight. It could have gone either way, and they just had a little bit more wriggling than you did. Yeti, how do you approach a robot like Yeti?
We know how they fight. They are very aggressive and always moving. And so it's a very difficult opponent to fight because we need a moment to have them in a fixed position to grab. We finally fixed the hydraulics as good as we could. After the Captain Shredderator fight, we found out that when something gets stuck between the beak, the motor stalls. At the moment it goes from high speed, low pressure to low speed, high pressure, the motor which runs the pump stalls. And the only thing we had to do was release the throttle and hit it again. And then it would go to full pressure. But we didn't know that. Because in the arena you cannot hear that the motor's not running. And with testing we never noticed it until after the fight against Captain Shredderator.
Right.
It wasn't full pressure there, because if we had full pressure on Captain Shredderator, it would have gone top in, bottom out. Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I'm sure.
Straight through like a skewer.
Yeah. So about Yeti, it has 2mm aluminium on top and at the bottom. So if we were able to grab him, even without the full pressure, we would have gone through. But Yeti is very hard to grip and has a very powerful drum, as you have seen.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very experienced team, and we knew that. And in this fight, you can clearly see the difference between experience and lack of experience. So, to be honest, we didn't think we would win this fight. We were hoping to last for the full 3 minutes, but unfortunately, that also didn't work.
I think got a wheel pinned fairly early on, which didn't help you guys. Yeah,
he hit that same spot twice at full speed. It can take one hit. You've seen that in all my other fights, the flaps that go over the wheels are there to take the first hit. And they did their job, but a second hit or a third hit will knock a wheel out, and then it's over. In the end, when they started counting down, I could still move the other wheel, but what's the use? The fight was lost, so I stopped moving.
Save the robot in case you actually do make it through and not take more damage.
Yeah.
Probably a sensible choice. It's but Yeti's a how highly do you rate Yeti as an opponent? Obviously, you haven't fought them this season, but how good is Yeti?
Well, it's number 4 from last season, so
yeah.
And it nearly beat the Tombstone then. It survived Tombstone and nearly beat it. So, it's a tough opponent. Not the one I would choose if I had the choice about, let's say the top 10. If I had to choose one of the top 10 robots, it wouldn't be Yeti.
Yeah, it's a tough machine, obviously. Hal, I don't know if you would know the reaction in the pits to this fight. It's all kind of a bit of a reverse.
I was in recovery mode when this match.
I think most of us were.
I was counting how many wheel axles I had left. So I wasn't in the pits for that one.
Oh, fair enough then. That's fair. Steve, again, another good fight.
Yeah, another really good fight, I think. I really would have loved to see Petunia poke into the innards of Yeti, but you guys lost the tip of that crusher
Yes.
pretty early, and I was a little worried that we weren't going to see some crushing. That Yeti drum is just killer. It's really like you can look at Yeti and say like, wow, there's a lot of places you can go around that are not the drum, but he keeps that faced at you. He's just tenacious with that thing. And when he even says it after the fight, where he's like, you know what, just screw it, I'm just going and throwing my face at you and just gonna just wreck you as much as possible. No strategy, just drum into your robot and that's it. So.
Yeah. And we knew that, so we were telling before the fight. They always ask what's your strategy, and we lied. We said, well, we go try to get around and grab him. No, but this you won't. The same with Tombstone. They're always aiming for the wheels. You won't get to the wheels. And with Yeti, it's the same thing. Maybe with a spinner, but not with a crusher like a Petunia. So we said to the other teammates, we go straight in and try to grab the drum. Maybe we can try to grab the drum and take it out. That was the only chance we had.
Didn't they? So Chomp really got it last season, didn't they? They were very close. So
And Lockjaw did it once.
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah, who knows?
So it is possible. And even without a tip, it would still have some crushing power because it was only 2 millimeters of aluminium. You won't need a tip to get through that.
So
losing the tip wasn't directly a problem, but losing a wheel is. So that was the end of the fight.
Obviously, at this point, you're also 2-2. What did you think? Did you fancy your chances or kind of a bit reserved?
I know. If I lost the Yeti fight, the chances of getting into the Sweet 16 would be very slim. But we did score some points at the Monsoon fight because it was spectacular, and we got back from that fight. So the Captain Shredderator fight wasn't really that good because they died before I could grab it. I only grabbed it to make some of show out of it. But yeah,
we'll have to wait and see.
But it's basically what Hal said. Why his front is vertical and not a wedge. The same thing with a full body spinner. You have to take them into the walls because the walls don't absorb. Yeah, they don't absorb the energy. Put it right back into the robot. So that was our tactic against Captain Shredderator. Try to make it hit the wall and knock itself out, and that's what it did.
It worked in the end, didn't it? And it kind of, I'd say you've had a very decent season considering the current meta in terms of robots is mostly vertical spinners. It's I think a crusher these days is kind of very abstract. I think as an abstract machine.
Yeah,
you've done very well. I think.
And we stick to this design. We already redesigning it. I have some parts which I'm testing right now for a version number 2, and hopefully we will be back with the crusher, and hopefully this time we can show that it can actually crush.
Yeah, I've actually forgot to ask Hal. Going forward, are you sticking with the duck principle, or are you going back to Ringmaster? What's the future hold?
We don't know. I would prefer to do Ringmaster just because it's more technically interesting, and if we could get it to work, I think it would be fun to watch it. On the other hand, Duck was just really fun to drive, and I think if we did a version 2 of Duck, it could be, well, I'm going to say something stupid. It could be better. So we're kind of torn. It's hard to tell from the way they've edited the show so far, but I think partly because of the name Duck and partly because my team captain is my 13-year-old daughter. It was really popular with the audience.
Yeah, they totally loved it. Like from the from episode 1 where you hear quack, quack, quack for the judge's decision, they're totally into it.
Yeah, so I think that's influencing us as well. Like, people liked it, so maybe we should do a better version and come back with it. We just don't know. It also depends in part on if they make any rule changes.
True.
I think we have enough spinners, so stick with the duck.
It's too bad we didn't fight, because we would have been the perfect opponent for you.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, you could have crushed the hell out of us without worrying about a spinner.
BattleBots, next season, I want to see these two fight. Hal and Mischa need to have a fight. We want to see it.
Yeah.
We'll move on to, first of all, a big thank you from myself. Just this weekend, just gone, the Monsoon team very, very kindly invited me to join them for the featherweight competition at Insomnia, King of Bots. I joined them for that weekend. That was great fun. There's a load of videos online. Go and check them out. They're great. The team are really, really lovely, and they said, do you want to come along for some fun? I said, sure, why not? Monsoon. This season so far has been kind of like, much like you, Mischa. They started very, very quickly, had a bit of a rough spell with the son of Waiachi, and then they fight Axe Backwards, who's kind of, it looks like a beautiful machine, Axe Backwards, but it just lacks that almost killer instinct. I don't know really how to. What are your guys' thoughts on Axe Backwards?
Yeah, you go first, Hal.
Okay. Well, obviously we didn't get to. Obviously, yet we haven't gone up against him. They were near us in the pit, so we got to see inside the robot. And in my opinion, it's one of those machines that suffers from trying to do something new and not having enough matches under its belt to fix the weaknesses.
Right.
Sort of like Ringmaster was. So I'm hoping that they'll stick with it and do a new version, because it showed potential for getting in some really big hits, and it's a lot of fun to watch it. And the ideas behind it are perfectly valid. I just think they need, like everyone, need to get some more matches under their belt and some new iterations so that they can work out the kinks. That's one of the challenges of such a ridiculous schedule, such a ridiculous build schedule, because people like us and Axe Backwards have robots that we've built in weeks and have never fought before, going up against robots that have been refined over 15 years, like Tombstone and Bronco. It's just a really difficult challenge for someone bringing in a brand new bot to beat a really, really experienced robot. Obviously, some people did it, right? Huge had a great season with their crazy ideas that worked out so well. So it's not impossible. It's just the schedule makes an extra element of difficulty.
Yeah, I mean, with Huge is kind of an exception, because obviously they've got the smaller robots as well to kind of base their ideas off. But I noticed that a lot of robots that were new for season 3, like brand new for season 3, a lot of those have done, say, not as well as those that are kind of the designs have been there before. They've just been either updated or refined, so to speak. Yeah,
makes sense. But if we had 3 months to build one and test it rather than 3 weeks, it would make a big difference.
But back to the fight itself. There wasn't really much of a fight between Monsoon and Axe Backwards. Obviously, Monsoon stuck on the other bar. I can't imagine what robot that's from. They stuck on the other bar, and it wasn't really much of a fight. Axe Backwards got a couple of hits, and the drive stopped. I did find it interesting that he, the captain, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he kept saying, hit the weapon, hit the weapon. He knew exactly what he was doing. That he wanted them to hit them so that he'd start working again.
Oh yeah.
he knew exactly what he was doing. It was fun enough, to watch the interaction, but as a fight, it it wasn't much of a fight. It really wasn't. Steve, anything much to add or?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I just wish this fight lasted a little longer. I wanted to see some more destruction, but yeah, like having seen Axe Backwards in person, actually, I was at a competition in Stuart, Florida, and this robot was on display. It is so cool looking, and there's so much ingenuity. I mean, we've seen robots in the past that actually have this design or have the whole like motors in the wheels kind of thing, like Stinger or Robot Wars. It's a really neat thing to see. It just needs more. It definitely needs more refining, and I think it could be really deadly, given more fights and more experience and more fixing things that break in fights, like refining them and strengthening it up. I think it could be a pretty tough competitor for anybody, but it's tough when the weapon is so huge. It's such a big thing to hit, and there's one thing that you can't do is really protect the wheels with this kind of design. So it's kind of a fault of it, but I really hope they do go forward and improve it, because I'd like to see it back.
Yeah, it was a cool robot to watch, certainly, but yeah, they've ended this season, I think, on an 0-3, which is a shame, really, because I think, ingenuity doesn't always reward itself in victory, but it's one of those things. As the guys have said, I would also like to see Axe Backwards come back with a little bit more refinement. As Hal said, designing something in 3 weeks and designing something over a year or 2 years is a big difference. So we'll have to wait and see. Our next fight was an interesting one. Warhead and Warrior Dragon. Oh, Warhead. They finally put the disc on. I'm so happy, because as much as I love the aesthetic of the Dino head, it looks fantastic. But I've been craving, I wanted to see Warhead, use the amplifier motors on that disc all season. And when they do, the disc splits in half. I mean, I believe... I don't know for sure. I from what I've read online, that's down to metal fatigue. Is that, are you two able to confirm that?
It looked like it, the way it cut itself, the way it broke. It looked like how do I say this? It didn't bend, it snapped, which is a sign of metal fatigue. But there's so much chaos in the energy that's going around in a match like that it could have easily broken in the same way if it was a brand new part.
Yeah, I mean, the energy that the kinetic weapons these days throw out is kind of ridiculous. So, as you mentioned, it was, it could have happened at any point. I mean, I'm because I believe it is still the original disc as well.
Yes, it was.
It was the original disc. Yeah, that's the. Yeah.
I talked to the guys from Warhead, and they said probably the beheading of Warhead by Minotaur last season had also something to do with it breaking this.
I was going to say, yeah. I'm sure that can't have helped. Getting decapitated last season was pretty brutal. I can imagine it probably affected them quite a lot. It did make this match very interesting in a sense that there was no real standout machine. They were both kind of limping around. Obviously, Warrior Dragon lost its kinetic ring, and Warhead was doing some crazy dance. I didn't know what to make of it. It was great. I think it was Chris or Kenny, I can't remember which one it was, but they said it looked like a drunk guy out in the streets. I could kind of see where he's coming from. As a fight though, again, not particularly interesting, but it was it was still a fun watch. All that fire.
Yeah, it was really pretty to see all that fire, and it probably was a little warm in there for poor little Warrior Dragon. I feel bad for that robot, because it's such a cool design with the whole having the outside rings spin up and provide energy basically for the flipper to work, but it breaks a lot, and we've seen that a lot in a lot of its fights, where that as soon as that disc stops spinning, or that ring, its flipper is history, and then it's just a wedge It's just a wedge with a circular body, and it's kind of a shame because I'd like to see it really do much better than it actually has done. Really.
Yeah, it's a cool concept, but again, I know that's been around for a while. But it's kind of the amount of space that they have in the robot. It just looks tiny, so I can't really imagine how else they package it unless they make a bigger robot. But that obviously brings its own set of weaknesses. So we'll move on to the main event. Now, obviously, Hal, you fought Bronco this season.
Right.
It is the most spectacular flipper that side of the pond. Like how do you beat it? Obviously you were very unlucky. You got flipped out of the arena, which is very difficult.
In such a weird way. Let me say.
I know.
Yeah.
It's so hard to get it there of all places. I think you must be the only robot that can fit in that gap for a start. How do you go about beating Bronco?
Bronco's really slow, and they're kind of tippy from the side. So I think the way for us to have beaten Bronco, which we obviously did not, was to get him on the side and lift him up and push him against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
We almost did it a couple times, but our beak just wasn't long enough. So we were lifting our lifter and not hitting anything meaningful. I don't really know. We couldn't get a straight answer. Maybe Mischa, but how many flips they're capable of doing during a match.
I don't know. I think 10 or more, 15 maybe.
Yeah,
I guess that's what I heard, and I don't know if the flips will become less powerful the more they do, or that it stays basically the same. I don't know that. The system is a little bit different than what we use here in the UK and the Netherlands. We run it on CO2, and you run it on, how do you call it in English?
It's nitrogen, I think, isn't it?
Nitrogen, yes.
Yeah.
It was an interesting, fight. I did notice towards the end the gas was definitely running out because they weren't able to throw Sawblaze, the miles into the air that it did, at the start. It was a spectacle.
I do know that their controller has 3 buttons for 3 levels of lift.
Oh, really?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when they got us, when they put us in the toaster, that was intentional. That wasn't a weak flip. That was an intentional small flip.
Wow.
Interesting. That's actually really cool.
Yeah.
And there again, you see what an experienced team can do with the robot. They know the robot. They know during the match they can change strategy. Most of the teams go in with one strategy, and if it doesn't work, you fail. But teams like Bronco and also Yeti can change their strategy during the match.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was
This is a good example of it. Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely. And obviously, there was some really cool moments in this fight. Sawblaze, chipping away at the battle box itself, which is I wouldn't like to. I think the ref on that side, he absolutely shat himself. This is the only way I can describe it. You just see him jump backwards as Sawblaze is flying towards the screen. Who wouldn't? It's it's a 250 pound, 113 odd kilo machine flying at your face. You wouldn't duck. It's one of those things. But it was a great fight, and towards the end, I thought Sawblaze really came into it quite well, considering the amount of abuse that it had taken from Bronco. Obviously, I don't know if you two have spoken about Sawblaze much. What do you rate about that machine as opposed to Bronco?
I'm not afraid of saws for my bot. What I am afraid of is their scoop working so damn well.
Mm-hmm.
It just works better than it should when you look at it. Because they're a two-wheel bot, and when they accelerate, their front end lifts up, which should be a big weakness, but for some reason it's not. They just drive it so well that they're always getting underneath everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Scorpios doesn't do the little wheelie. It's got more weight in the front, and it's hard to tell on TV. But their front plow has a little. It bends up a little bit on the inside. How do I describe this? There's a split on the inside, and it pokes up. So these two little rising pieces of metal that get underneath you and grab you. So it's scary.
So it snags you on top, basically.
Yeah, it snags you, exactly. That's a better way to say it.
That's pretty... Go on.
So I don't care about the saws, just like I don't care about the kill saws in the arena. But
we know what happened there.
Yeah. It was back in the days when we used to see lightweights fly across the arena.
But they're very good both very good drivers, and their scoops work really well.
Which way did you think it was going to go? I mean, both of you at the time, did you think it was going to go Bronco's way, or were you thinking more of a surprise?
I thought Sawblaze had a really good chance at getting him from the side and capturing them between their scoop and the wall and getting in some sparks that wouldn't do any damage but would look really good. I was surprised that they weren't able to do that more often. But Bronco did its thing, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Mischa, what did you think? Going into the fight, which way did you see it going?
Yeah, the same as Hal said. I would have expected them more to get to the side and use that scoop. Sawblaze. I think Sawblaze should have done better. Not that he did not do any good, but yeah, I was expecting them because Bronco is long and not the fastest one. So I would have put my money on Sawblaze, I guess, but close call.
Yeah, it was a great fight either way. I mean, both machines, gave it.
Although I don't think Sawblaze would have been capable of knocking out Bronco.
No, I think it would have taken a judge's win, wouldn't it?
Yeah. That would have been my guess.
Steve, anything to add to really?
Yeah, I guess a little. But I mean, it was they pretty much summed it up. But I mean, honestly, I was not to say surprised, but I guess I was surprised to see how well Sawblaze's pontoons got into places on Bronco and was able to push it around so well with just those two wheels, because it doesn't seem like it should be able to do that. And we do see that Bronco really does respect Jameson and his robot a lot, with the fact that they put every single piece of protective armor on their robot. I don't know, out of fear or out of just respect of what that robot can do. And it kind of worked against them, where it kind of gave Sawblaze places to hook on with those front forks of its wedge, and it kind of gave it ways to get stuck in and be able to push Bronco around. But that flip at the beginning in front of the driver's boxes must have been so scary. And the chip it takes out of the glass, it's like, oh man, I don't know if I could. I mean, I probably would be shaken up if I saw that happen to my robot. But I mean, Jameson didn't. He's just locked in. But yeah, it was a really good fight overall. I didn't expect Sawblaze to win. I wanted it to win. My heart wanted it to win, because I like seeing upsets like that. But yeah, it was just a clinic by Bronco. But there were some points in this fight where Sawblaze did really push it around, and I was proud of it for that. I think it had a good showing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that pretty much sums up episode 14. I certainly enjoyed this one a lot more than a lot of more recent ones. It was a really stacked fight card. Gentlemen, thank you very much. It was a pleasure seeing your bots fight. Unfortunately, obviously, they both did end up losing, which is a bit of a shame, really. But it could have gone either way for both of you, and ultimately, I think you both put on a really good show. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and hopefully we'll get a new season.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, season 4. That's the new hashtag we need to get going. We want season 4.
Exactly.
Obviously, we don't know if you guys are going to be back again this season. Fingers crossed, obviously, for both of you that you do end up in the top 16. But we'll have to try and keep an eye out for you guys later on. But
we'll finally find out soon, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have to be getting really close to the bracket because we're at episode 14 of 20. So to leave enough room for at least most of the fights in the bracket. Hopefully it's soon. I'd like to know. I mean, inquiring minds would like to know who's in.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny. It's been so long since the matches actually took place. When I watch them, I still get nervous.
Oh, really?
I wonder if we're going to make the top 16.
That's gold.
The questions we have to ask. Oh, dear me. I'll say, again, massive thanks to Hal and Mischa. You've both been good sports. I know ultimately it didn't go quite the way you guys planned it this episode, but you even if we don't see you again this season, you've both been great entertainment. And
let me say one thing: there are about 50 teams that participate on BattleBots, and 49 of them are thinking, "If only."
Absolutely. But as I say, thank you both very much for putting on a good show this season. You both had some spectacular fights, and hopefully, as I say, we'll see you again.
Yes.
Thank you.
With that said, I've been Samuel864.
I've been Steve, the American Killjoy.
And we'll see you next week for episode 15. Sayonara.
Bye.